Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that an entire G7 nation has just crossed a threshold that no modern democracy is supposed to cross? What if the invisible force that has kept millions of households afloat, hope itself, has just vanished? Not slowly, not gradually, but in a single measurable moment captured in the data released just weeks ago. I need you to understand something. This is not about Canada having a bad year. This is not about temporary inflation or a cyclical downturn. This is about the complete psychological collapse of confidence in an entire economic system. And when I show you the numbers, you'll see why this represents a structural fault line, not just in Canadian society, but as a warning signal for every Western economy teetering on the same edge. Here's the mathematical reality that should terrify anyone paying attention. 71%. That's not a margin. That's not a polling error. That is 7 out of every 10 Canadians who now expect their lives to get worse in 2026. Think about that for a moment. In a wealthy, stable, resource-rich nation, a country that exports energy, minerals, and food to the world, nearly 3/4 of the population have given up on the idea that tomorrow will be better than today. This is a singular inevitability. The data doesn't lie. And what we're witnessing in real time is the transition from illusion to reality. The illusion that debt-fueled prosperity could last forever. The reality that every economic structure built on borrowed time must eventually face its reckoning. But before we dive into what's happening right now, we need to understand how we got here, because this collapse didn't begin last week. It began decades ago in quiet policy rooms where central bankers made a calculated bet, a bet that has now come due. Let me take you back to the origin. Not to 2020, not to 2008, but to the fundamental architecture that created modern Canada's economy. After the Second World War, Western nations, including Canada, embraced a simple idea that government debt wasn't really debt at all. It was a tool, a lever, a way to manufacture prosperity without the painful discipline of actually earning it. Here's what they discovered. If you control the currency, you can borrow indefinitely. You print money, you buy your own bonds, and you tell the public this is monetary policy. It sounds complex, it sounds technical, but strip away the jargon, and here's what it actually is. It's a mortgage at 0% that never comes due. It's a 200-page IOU written to yourself. For decades, this worked. Why? Because belief is a currency too. As long as citizens believed the system was sustainable, as long as they believed property values would rise, as long as they believed wages would eventually catch up to costs, the entire edifice held together. The scaffolding of modern finance isn't made of steel, it's made of confidence. And confidence, friends, is evaporating in real time. Now let's talk about the mechanism that allowed this to go on for so long. This is what I call the big secret of the entire system. Canada, like most Western economies, became addicted to something called the carry trade. Here's how it works in simple terms. You borrow money at historically low rates, rates that should never exist in a functioning market, and you invest that borrowed money into assets that generate higher returns. Real estate, stocks, anything that appears to grow faster than the interest you're paying. Think of it like this. Imagine you could take out a mortgage at 0.5% interest, but the house you're buying is guaranteed to appreciate at 8% per year. You'd be insane not to borrow as much as possible, right? That's what every Canadian household, every developer, every speculator has been doing for the last 15 years. The cheap money flowed, the assets inflated, and everyone got rich on paper. But here's the twist. The simple logic of household budgeting does not apply to entire nations. When a government borrows, it borrows from its own future. When millions of households borrow simultaneously, they're not just borrowing from banks. They're borrowing from a shared pool of liquidity that must eventually run dry. And when that liquidity tide goes out, we find out who was swimming naked, which brings us to today, to the data released by the MNP Consumer Debt Index in early 2026. These aren't projections. These aren't forecasts. These are confessions. Let me read them to you because each statistic is a canary dying in the coal mine. 71% expect the cost of living to worsen this year, not stay the same, not improve slightly, worsen. 59% believe the overall economy will deteriorate. 59% expect housing affordability to collapse further. 44%, that's nearly half, say that if interest rates don't fall immediately, they will be pushed toward bankruptcy, not financial stress, bankruptcy, the legal obliteration of their economic existence. And here's the part that should haunt you. 41% of Canadian households are now within $200 of insolvency. $200, that's not a cushion, that's a rounding error. That's one unexpected car repair, one medical bill, one late paycheck away from the entire structure imploding. Let me put this in perspective. Canada's economy is approximately $2.2 trillion. That's the sum total of all goods and services produced in a year. But household debt, the money owed by ordinary Canadians, stands at over $2.5 trillion. Think about that ratio. The people owe more than the entire economy produces. This is not a country. This is a leveraged bet on infinite growth that has already lost. Now, I know what you're thinking, but wait, didn't the Bank of Canada cut rates? Didn't they try to ease the pressure? Yes, they did. And that's precisely why this is terrifying, because it didn't work. The Bank of Canada has slashed rates repeatedly, and yet the Consumer Debt Index shows no relief. In fact, it shows the opposite, a population that has already given up hope. This is what I call the money illusion. Prices on paper might stabilize. Wage numbers might tick up slightly, but at the grocery store, at the gas pump, in the insurance bill that arrives every month, Canadians are getting poorer. You can be a millionaire on paper and still be unable to afford rent. That's not wealth. That's a phantom. Let me give you a concrete example, a forensic piece of evidence that shows just how deep the rot goes. In late 2024, a mid-sized auto lender in Canada called Tricolor quietly collapsed. You probably didn't hear about it. It wasn't front page news. But here's what matters. Tricolor specialized in subprime auto loans. They lent money to people who couldn't qualify anywhere else. And when credit lines froze, when liquidity started draining from the system, Tricolor couldn't roll over its debt. It vaporized overnight. This is the exact same pattern we saw in 2008 with mortgage lenders in the United States. Small, obscure companies fail first. They're the canaries, then mid-sized firms, then the giants. By the time the giants fall, it's too late to stop the contagion. And contagion is the correct word because what we're seeing is not isolated, it's spreading. Housing prices in Ontario and British Columbia, the two economic engines of Canada, are losing momentum despite rate cuts. That should be impossible. Lower rates are supposed to boost housing demand, but they're not. Why? Because demand isn't the problem. Affordability is. And affordability is a function of income, not interest rates. If your wages can't keep pace with costs, a lower rate just means you can borrow yourself into a slightly larger hole. This leads us to the system's most crucial secret, which we will explore in depth shortly. But first, you need to understand the scale of what's coming, because this isn't just about Canada. This is about every Western economy that chose the same path, the path of infinite debt, infinite leverage, infinite belief in the power of central banks to suspend the laws of mathematics. Japan tried this in the 1990s. They called it the lost decades. Europe is trying it now. The United States has been trying it since 2008. And now Canada, stable, resource-rich, boring Canada, has become the latest nation to discover that you cannot print your way to prosperity. You can only print your way to the illusion of prosperity. And illusions, friends, always end the same way. They snap. So let's examine exactly how this structure is crumbling, piece by piece in real time. Because what we're witnessing isn't a single failure, it's a convergence. Three distinct forces hitting simultaneously, each one amplifying the others in a feedback loop that no policymaker can stop. First, there's the demographic time bomb. Canada's population is aging rapidly. The baby boomers who built their wealth on rising home prices are now trying to retire. But here's the problem. Their wealth isn't real. It's equity in houses that younger generations cannot afford to buy. So what happens? Those boomers can't sell without crashing the market. And if they can't sell, they can't access their wealth. It's trapped, frozen, a number on a screen that evaporates the moment they try to turn it into actual purchasing power. Meanwhile, the younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, are locked out entirely. The average home price in Toronto is now over $1 million. The average household income, about $85,000. That's a ratio of nearly 12 to 1. Historically, a healthy housing market operates at 3 to 1, maybe 4 to 1 in expensive cities. 12 to 1 is not a market. It's a mathematical impossibility disguised as an asset class. And here's where it gets worse. Those young Canadians who did manage to scrape together a down payment, they did so by borrowing from parents, from credit cards, from alternative lenders charging rates that would make a loan shark blush. The entire foundation of Canadian home ownership is now built on stacked debt. Debt on top of debt on top of debt. Second, there's the employment crisis that nobody wants to acknowledge. The official unemployment rate in Canada looks reasonable, around 6%, but that number is a lie told through statistical manipulation. It doesn't count people who've given up looking for work. It doesn't count people working part-time who need full-time hours. It doesn't count the gig workers with no benefits, no security, no path to stability. The MNP data reveals the truth. 52% of Canadians expect weakness in the job market and unemployment pressure to intensify in 2026. They're not wrong, because what we're seeing is the hollowing out of the middle class. High-paying manufacturing jobs, gone, shipped overseas decades ago. Middle management positions, automated or outsourced. What's left? Service jobs that pay barely above minimum wage and tech jobs that require credentials most people can't afford to obtain. This is why the statistic about $200 is so devastating. It's not that Canadians are irresponsible. It's that the entire economic structure has been re-engineered to extract maximum productivity while providing minimum compensation. You're not failing the system. The system is designed to fail you. Third, and this is the linchpin that holds everything together, there's the government debt spiral. Canada's federal debt now exceeds $1.2 trillion. Provincial debts add hundreds of billions more. And here's the cruel irony. More than half of Canadians, 53%, expect taxes to increase in 2026. They're right to expect this, because when governments are this deep in debt, they have only three options. Option one, cut spending. But cutting spending means cutting services, cutting transfers, cutting all the programs that keep the bottom from completely falling out. Politically impossible. Option two, default. Admit the debt can never be repaid and restructure. But that would destroy Canada's credit rating, spike interest rates even higher, and trigger a currency collapse. Also impossible. Option three, inflate the debt away. Print more money, let inflation erode the real value of what's owed, and quietly steal purchasing power from savers and workers. This is the option they always choose. This is the option they're choosing right now. But here's the trap. Inflation doesn't just erode government debt, it erodes everything: your savings, your salary, your ability to plan for the future. And when people realize this, when they understand that their own government is deliberately impoverishing them to service unsustainable debts, that's when the psychological contract breaks. That's what the 71% represents. It's not pessimism, it's recognition. The population has figured out the game. They know the dollar in their pocket will buy less next year. They know their wages won't keep pace. They know the promises made to them, affordable housing, secure retirement, upward mobility, were lies. Now, let me show you the behavioral response to this realization, because it's already happening and it's exactly what you'd expect from a population in crisis. According to the MNP survey, Canadians are splitting into two camps. The first camp, about 59%, are taking what they call proactive steps. They're budgeting, they're trying debt consolidation, they're seeking financial advice. These are people still fighting, still believing that with enough discipline and planning, they can navigate through the storm. But then there's the second camp, 32% of the population. And this is the group that should terrify policymakers. These people are in what the survey calls flight mode. They're avoiding financial responsibility entirely. They're using credit cards to cover essential expenses like groceries and utilities. They're not opening their bank statements. They're not answering calls from creditors. 15% admit they feel completely paralyzed, financially frozen, unsure where to even begin. This is not laziness. This is not irresponsibility. This is a rational response to an impossible situation. When the debt is too large to ever repay, when the math simply doesn't work no matter how hard you try, the only sane reaction is to stop trying, to disconnect, to enter what psychologists call learned helplessness. Let me give you another concrete example because I want you to see how this plays out in real life. In early 2025, a housing development company called Renovo Homes went bankrupt in British Columbia. They had dozens of projects under construction: townhouses, condos, single-family homes. Thousands of buyers had put down deposits, believing they would get keys to their new homes within a year or two. Those buyers lost everything. Their deposits, often $50,000 or more, vanished when Renovo's creditors seized the assets. No homes were completed, no refunds were issued. The buyers were left with nothing but debt from the loans they'd taken out to make those deposits in the first place. Now, multiply that story by hundreds of similar cases across the country. Multiply it by the auto loans that are defaulting, by the small businesses that can't make payroll, by the credit card balances that will never be paid down. What you're seeing is the unwind, the great deleveraging, the moment when all the bets placed on infinite growth come due at once. And here's the part that connects this to the broader global system. Canada is not unique. Canada is the preview, because every Western nation has made the same choices. They've all borrowed beyond their means. They've all inflated asset bubbles. They've all promised more than they can deliver. The question isn't whether this system collapses. The question is when and how violently. Some of you are probably thinking, but wait, you said the Bank of Canada cut rates. Doesn't that help? And the answer is, it makes things worse. Because here's what lower rates actually mean. They mean more borrowing, more leverage, more inflation. They're trying to solve a debt crisis with more debt. It's like treating a drug addiction by prescribing stronger drugs. Lower rates might provide temporary relief. A few people might refinance their mortgages and reduce their monthly payments. A few businesses might borrow to stay afloat a bit longer. But it doesn't address the fundamental problem. There is too much debt, and there is not enough productive economic activity to service that debt. This is what I mean when I say we're watching the transition from illusion to reality. The illusion was that central banks could control the economy forever, that rates could stay low forever, that asset prices could rise forever. The reality is that every artificial stimulus has a cost. Every intervention creates distortions, and those distortions eventually become too large to hide. So, what happens next? What does this look like as it unfolds over the next 12 to 24 months? Here's the pattern we should expect based on every historical precedent. First, the defaults accelerate. More companies like Tricolor and Renovo. More households declaring bankruptcy. The official statistics will lag behind reality by months, so by the time the government admits there's a crisis, it'll already be in full swing. Second, the banking sector starts to crack. Canadian banks are considered safe, among the most stable in the world. But that stability is built on the assumption that most mortgages get repaid. What happens when they don't? When housing prices fall and borrowers walk away because they're underwater, the banks don't collapse overnight, but their stock prices crater, their lending freezes up. Credit becomes scarce exactly when people need it most. Third, and this is the political inflection point, governments panic. They'll announce emergency measures, stimulus packages, mortgage relief programs, maybe even direct cash payments to citizens. But where does that money come from? More borrowing, more debt, more inflation. The cure becomes indistinguishable from the disease. And this is where we arrive at the convergence, the moment where all three forces I described hit simultaneously and create what I call the trifecta of collapse. We are facing a convergence that has never occurred in Canadian history. First, a structural break in household confidence where 71% of the population expects deterioration. Second, a domestic liquidity crisis where 44% are one rate hike away from bankruptcy. Third, a sovereign debt spiral where the government itself is trapped between impossible choices: cut services and trigger social unrest, or print money and trigger currency collapse. These three forces are not independent. They feed each other. When households stop spending, businesses fail. When businesses fail, tax revenues collapse. When tax revenues collapse, government debt spirals faster. When government debt spirals, they print more money. When they print more money, inflation accelerates. When inflation accelerates, households cut spending even more. This is the death spiral. And once it starts, there is no policy lever that can stop it. You cannot cut rates enough. You cannot print enough. You cannot stimulus package your way out of a crisis caused by too much stimulus. But before we talk about what you can do, and there are things you can do, I need to address the most dangerous enemy you face right now. And it's not the government, it's not the banks, it's not even the debt itself, it's your own mind. Human beings are hardwired to believe that tomorrow will look like yesterday. Psychologists call this normalcy bias. It's the cognitive trick that allows us to function day to day without being paralyzed by fear. But it's also the trap that keeps people holding assets all the way down to zero. Here's how normalcy bias works in a financial crisis. You see the warnings, you see the data, you see the 71% pessimism, you see the bankruptcies starting to pile up, but your brain says, yes, but Canada is stable. Yes, but the government will step in. Yes, but my house has always gone up in value. Yes, but this time is different. It's never different. The patterns repeat because human psychology repeats. The same normalcy bias that kept people in their homes as Hurricane Katrina approached is the same normalcy bias that will keep people holding stocks and real estate as the economic hurricane makes landfall. I want you to understand something crucial. The wealthiest people in history, the people who survive these collapses and come out stronger, are not smarter than you. They're not luckier than you. What they have is the ability to act against their own normalcy bias, to see the pattern, to recognize the math, and to move their wealth out of the line of fire before everyone else realizes what's happening. Because here's what always happens in these moments. First, the smart money exits quietly. The billionaires, the hedge funds, the insiders who see the data before it's published. They sell their overvalued assets and move into safety. Then, weeks or months later, the crisis becomes obvious to everyone. The headlines scream, the markets crash, and by then there's no exit. The door is too narrow, everyone's trying to sell at once, and the wealth simply evaporates. This is what I mean by the money illusion. You look at your investment portfolio and you see numbers. You look at your home equity and you see a net worth figure. But those are not real until you convert them to something tangible. And if you wait until everyone else is converting at the same time, you'll find there are no buyers. The liquidity has vanished. Your $1 million house can't sell for 700,000. Your stock portfolio that was worth 200,000 is now worth 80,000, and it's still falling. So let me ask you the most important question you'll face in the next 12 months. Do you own assets or do you own claims on assets? This is the binary choice. This is the fork in the road. Let me explain the difference, because your financial survival depends on understanding it. A claim on an asset is a piece of paper, or more often a digital entry, that says you're entitled to something. A stock certificate is a claim on a company's future profits. A bond is a claim on future repayment. A mortgage is a claim on a property that the bank actually owns until you make the final payment. These claims have value only as long as everyone agrees they have value. When that agreement breaks, when confidence evaporates, claims become worthless instantly. An asset, by contrast, is something real, something tangible, something that exists independent of anyone's belief or anyone's promise. Gold is an asset. Silver is an asset. Land, actual physical land that you own outright, is an asset. Food is an asset. Energy is an asset. Things you can touch, things you can use, things that have intrinsic value regardless of what numbers appear on a screen. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking, but gold doesn't produce income. Land doesn't pay dividends. Why would I move my wealth into something that just sits there? And that is exactly the mindset that destroys wealth in a crisis. Because what you're really saying is, I want my money to grow. But here's the truth. In a collapse, growth stops. The goal is not growth. The goal is preservation. The goal is to be one of the few people who still has purchasing power when the system resets. And make no mistake, there will be a reset. History shows us this pattern over and over. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela. When governments print too much money, when debt becomes unpayable, when populations lose faith in the currency, there is always a reset. Sometimes it's a formal restructuring. Sometimes it's hyperinflation that destroys the old currency and forces the creation of a new one. Sometimes it's a depression that liquidates debts through mass bankruptcy. But the reset always happens. The only question is, what will your wealth look like on the other side? If your wealth is in Canadian dollars sitting in a bank account, it will be worth significantly less. If your wealth is in stocks tied to consumer spending, it will crater as households stop buying. If your wealth is in bonds, you'll be repaid in currency that buys half of what it used to. If your wealth is in a house with a massive mortgage, you'll be underwater and unable to sell. But if your wealth is in gold, in physical gold that you hold, not gold ETFs, not gold certificates, but actual metal, you will have preserved your purchasing power. Because while the dollar amount might fluctuate, the real value of gold remains constant. An ounce of gold has bought roughly the same amount of goods for thousands of years. It's not that gold goes up in value, it's that paper currencies go down. Gold simply stands still while everything else collapses around it. The same applies to silver, though silver is more volatile. The same applies to land, if you own it outright with no debt attached. The same applies to any hard asset that has utility and cannot be printed into existence by a desperate government. This is not investment advice. I'm not a financial advisor. This is pattern recognition. This is history. This is the lesson written in blood and bankruptcy across every empire that thought it could spend and print its way to permanent prosperity. So here's what I'm asking you to do, not telling, asking. Take an honest inventory of your wealth. Look at what you own versus what you owe. Look at what's real versus what's a promise. Look at what you control versus what depends on someone else honoring their obligations. If you're heavily leveraged, if you have more debt than assets, you need to deleverage immediately. Sell what you can sell. Pay down what you can pay down. Because when liquidity dries up, debt becomes a death sentence. If you're sitting on paper wealth, stocks, bonds, cash, you need to seriously consider diversifying into hard assets. Not all of it, maybe 10%, maybe 20%, but enough that if the system cracks, you have something real to fall back on. And if you're one of the 32% in flight mode, if you've been avoiding the problem, hiding from the numbers, I need you to understand that avoidance makes it worse. The debt doesn't go away, the interest compounds, the consequences multiply. The longer you wait, the fewer options you have. I know this is uncomfortable. I know it contradicts everything you've been told by the financial industry, by the government, by the talking heads on TV. They will tell you that Canada is safe, that the banks are solid, that housing always recovers, that you should stay the course and think long term. But here's what they won't tell you. Those messages are designed to keep you in the system because the system requires your participation to survive. It requires you to keep borrowing, keep spending, keep believing. The moment too many people step out, the moment too many people convert their claims to actual assets, the whole structure implodes. This is not a conspiracy. This is not some shadowy plot. This is stated policy. Central banks openly admit they need to maintain confidence. Governments openly admit they need economic growth to service their debts. The entire edifice is built on the assumption that everyone keeps playing the game. But 71% of Canadians have just told us through the MNP data that they no longer believe in the game. They see through it. They know what's coming. The question is, are you in the 71% who see it, or are you in the 29% still clinging to normalcy bias? Let me close with this. I started by telling you about a threshold no democracy is supposed to cross. That threshold is the moment when the majority of citizens give up hope in the system's ability to deliver prosperity. When that happens, everything changes. Trust evaporates, cooperation breaks down, the social contract, the invisible agreement that holds civilization together, starts to fray. We are at that threshold right now, not approaching it, not heading toward it. We are there. The data proves it. The 71% proves it. And what happens next depends entirely on how quickly people recognize the reality and act on it. History favors the prepared. It always has. The people who survived the Great Depression weren't the ones with the biggest stock portfolios. They were the ones who saw it coming and moved to safety before the panic hit. The people who survived hyperinflation in Weimar Germany weren't the ones with savings accounts. They were the ones who converted currency to gold, to land, to tangible goods while there was still time. You still have time. Not much, but some. The window for preparation is closing. The liquidity tide is going out. And very soon we're going to find out who was swimming naked. Don't be one of them. Think carefully about what I've shown you today. Look at the data yourself. It's public, it's measurable, it's undeniable. And then make the choice that your future self will thank you for. Because when this is over, when the reset happens and the smoke clears, there will be two groups of people, those who prepared and those who wished they had. I know which group I want you to be in. Friends, thank you for your time today. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and most importantly, stay ahead of the curve.